Leonarda had always believed that life in the small village of Kibra, on the outskirts of Nairobi, Kenya, was peaceful. She lived in a simple house made of mud and straw, surrounded by friendly but curious neighbors. The routine was predictable: wake up early, fetch water from the community well, prepare meals and look after the children. The heat of the African sun was scorching, and the nights came with a deep silence, broken only by the distant sounds of tribal drums and howling jackals. The only person Leonarda never had much contact with was Mama Abeni, her next-door neighbor. An old woman with wrinkled skin and deep-set eyes, she seemed to know things that no one else did. The village elders said she was Mganga, a healer with mysterious powers. Others whispered that there was something darker about her, something that shouldn't be questioned. One day, after an exhausting morning at the local market, Leonarda was returning home when Mama Abeni called her from the gate. "My daughter, come in and get some rest. I've made fresh coffee." Leonarda hesitated. Something inside her told her it was better to refuse, but the old lady's soft voice enveloped her like a whisper in the warm wind. She smiled awkwardly and went inside. Mama Abeni's house was different. The air seemed heavy, as if time passed differently there. Tribal masks hung from the walls, dried herbs were scattered across the ceiling, and a strong smell of incense permeated the room. In the center of the small room, a dark wooden table was set with 2 steaming cups. "Drink, my child. This coffee brings good dreams." Leonarda held the cup, smelling the thick, bitter aroma. As she took the first sip, a shiver ran down her spine. The coffee was hot, but something about it felt cold. At that moment, she didn't know it yet, but that coffee would seal her fate. As soon as the bitter liquid slid down her throat, Leonarda felt a heaviness in her eyes. Her vision blurred and the world around her spun as if she were being sucked into a dark vortex. Her body became heavy and her arms lost strength. She tried to stand up, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. What's in this coffee?" she mumbled, her voice slurred. Mama Abeni watched her with a calm smile, her wrinkled hands leisurely holding her own cup. "Just something to soothe your soul, my child. You've been working so hard, you need to rest." Leonarda tried to protest, but her mouth would no longer obey. Her body slid off the chair, falling to the dirt floor. Her heart hammered in panic as darkness took over. When he woke up, he smelled something strong, rancid, metallic, too sweet. His body was lying on a hard, cold surface. The dirt floor had been replaced by something sticky. He tried to move his arms, but they were bound with braided fibers. He heard a noise, the sound of a knife being sharpened. He tried to scream, but his throat was dry. His eyes adjusted to the dimness and then he saw. Next to him, on a large wooden bench stained red, mutilated bodies were piled up. Legs and arms had been cut off with surgical precision. Clean bones rested next to a large boiling cauldron, where something was slowly bubbling away. The smell was nauseating, a mixture of cooked fat and herbs. Mama Abeni hummed softly as she stirred the mixture with a wooden spoon. "The village wastes so much, but not me. Here, everything has a purpose." Leonarda swallowed. The cauldron wasn't boiling food. The thick, yellowish liquid that was slowly turning into something solid was soap. The shelves of the small house were full of white bars, wrapped in linen cloths and tied with colorful ribbons. Homemade soap. It's soft, fragrant and cleans the skin very well. The best soap I've ever made. Better than the stuff they sell on the market. And nobody ever asks where it comes from. Mama Abeni approached, picking up one of the bars and rubbing it between her hands, creating a thick lather. Her eyes shone in the lamplight. "Isn't it wonderful?" Leonarda held her breath. She tried to get free, but the knots were tight. Her eyes fixed on the knife, which gleamed in the darkness. She knew she had little time. If she didn't run now, she would be the next to become soap. Leonarda felt her heart hammering in her chest. The fear was paralyzing, but the instinct to survive screamed inside her. She couldn't die there. Mama Abeni continued to stir the cauldron, humming in a monotonous, disquieting tone. She began to move her wrists discreetly, feeling the rough fiber of the ties cutting into her skin. She tried to loosen the knots without making a sound. Each second seemed like an eternity. "You know, my daughter," Mama Abeni said, without turning around. "When they called me a healer, I helped the village. But people are never satisfied. One day, they stopped coming to me, they started calling me a witch. They said I brought bad luck. But who has always cleansed the sins of this place? Who has always turned the rot into something useful?" She laughed softly, taking another bar of soap and passing it under her nose, inhaling deeply. Leonarda pulled her wrists hard. Sweat dripped down her forehead. One of the knots gave way a little. One more pull, and the cord snapped. She knew that this was the moment. Without hesitation, she grabbed a knife from the counter and jumped to her feet. "No!" Mama Abeni shouted, turning to face her. Leonarda didn't wait. She advanced, trying to strike her, but the old woman was surprisingly agile. Mama Abeni grabbed her wrist with incredible strength, twisting it until the knife fell to the floor. "Did you think it would be that easy, my daughter?" she whispered, her eyes shining in the darkness. She tried to scream, but the woman's cold, bony hand covered her mouth. Leonarda felt the sharp nails pressing into her skin. The struggle was intense. Leonarda kicked, struggled, but the old woman's strength was superhuman. It was then that her gaze fell on the bubbling cauldron. With a desperate movement, Leonarda pushed her body forward and pushed Mama Abeni against the boiling container. The scream that followed echoed through the small house. The old woman's skin wrinkled and crumbled as it came into contact with the scalding liquid. The smell of burning flesh filled the room, mixed with the horrible sound of bones cracking. Mama Abeni struggled, trying to get out, but her strength left her. She looked at Leonarda one last time, her eyes wide with hatred, and then, silence. Her body stopped moving. Leonarda was panting, her heart racing. She had won. But there was no time to think. She grabbed a lamp and threw it against the shelves full of soap. The fire spread quickly, consuming everything. She ran out of the house, stumbling, her lungs burning with smoke. Behind her, the flames rose, illuminating the night. Mama Abeni's house was burning with fire and ghostly screams. But Leonarda was alive. Or at least, that's what she thought. Leonarda ran to her house with her chest burning with smoke and her lungs begging for air. Her body was weak, her legs were shaking, but she had to get out of there. The entire village had already noticed the fire and was beginning to gather, screams of shock and fear filling the air. "The fire is coming from old Abeni's house," someone exclaimed. "Is this a punishment from the ancestors?" whispered another voice. Leonarda reached her house and locked the door tightly, her body collapsing onto the dirt floor. She had survived. The horror of that night still pulsed inside her, each scene etched into her mind like a nightmare that would never end. But something made her hold her breath. The smell. She stood up suddenly and sniffed the air. The same sickening smell that permeated Mama Abeni's house, the hot fat, the sweet rancidity. She turned slowly to the shelf next to the kitchen. On the worn wood, stacked carefully, were several bars of soap. Soap she had bought from Mama Abeni herself weeks before. Bile rose in her throat. She felt the world spin as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. She had used this soap before. She had scrubbed her hands, washed her clothes, soaped her own children's bodies with it. The vomiting came fast and hard, and she fell to her knees, sobbing. But there was no time to break down. She had to get out of here. Arda noticed that the old woman seemed distracted, and this could be her only chance. The people of the village were beginning to surround the fire, some looking at Leonarda with suspicion. An elderly woman's gaze met his and narrowed, as if seeing the truth hidden in his soul. She knew. They would know. Leonarda hurriedly grabbed her children, with only the clothes on her back, and fled into the woods before the village could demand answers. She ran and ran until her legs gave out. I could never go back. But as the darkness of the night swallowed her, a terrible feeling crept up her spine. She could have sworn she heard a voice. Do you think this is over, my daughter? It was impossible. Mama Abeni was dead. Wasn't it? Leonarda ran through the forest with her children, her heart racing, her bare feet scratching against the roots and stones on the ground. The heat of the fire could still be felt behind her, but she didn't look back. I couldn't look back. His only thought was to escape. Flee the village, flee the accusing looks, flee that cursed house and the smell that now seemed to be impregnated in his skin. But then, she heard. First, a distant whisper, mixed with the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Do you think this is over, my daughter? Leonarda stopped suddenly, holding her children against her chest. His whole body trembled. The voice came again. Closer this time. I cleaned this village for years. I turned your rot into something pure. And you burned it all. The air around became dense, heavy. The forest seemed to close in on her. The crickets and cicadas fell silent. Even the animals knew something was wrong. Leonarda felt a presence. Cold sweat ran down the back of his neck. Slowly, he turned back. And there, in the middle of the dark forest, she was. Mama Abeni. Or what's left of it. His body was burned, his dark skin blackened and cracked, his eyes sunken and glowing like embers in the dark. But she was there. Whole. Alive. Or something worse. You threw me into the fire, my daughter. But fire does not destroy me. He reborns me. Leonarda's mouth opened in a scream, but nothing came out. Her body was frozen, as if an invisible force was holding her in place. Mama Abeni stepped forward. His smile widened, and his white teeth gleamed in the darkness. Now, you belong to me. The last thing Leonarda saw was the old woman's burned hands reaching out towards her. Then the world went dark. The next morning, the village woke up silent. The fire in Mama Abeni's house had consumed everything, reducing the hut to ashes. There was no body, there were no traces. Just the smell of smoke and a hint of something sour in the air. Leonarda and her children were never seen again. Some said she had fled to another village, fearing she would be accused of witchcraft. Others, however, whispered different stories. Children who played near the forest said that they sometimes saw a woman with burnt skin and coal eyes among the trees. And near the river, where the women washed clothes, something strange began to appear. Bars of white soap, tied in simple cloths, floating in the current. No one dared to touch them. For everyone knew. Mama Abeni was still there. Waiting. And cleaning up the village, in his own way.